Okay, it says we are live. I'm very excited. I'm very excited to have you here. So, welcome to Biz Doctor Office Hours. I am here with my guest Lori, and we are going to talk about hiring and the landscape of the industry and all good things. So, Lori, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself before I dive into my question?
Sure. So my name is Laurie Canepa. I'm the managing director for StevenDouglas in Texas. So I oversee the regions of pretty much all things Texas, anything within, I'm here in Austin, but I cover Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio as well. StevenDouglas is a 40-year-old brand. We were founded by a guy at PwC. We're just a newer brand to Texas. So they hired me 3 years ago to expand their presence here. We do a lot of things. We're an executive search firm, but my vertical is accounting and finance. It goes back to my roots of starting out in public accounting myself, former controller. So for the first 10 years of my life, I actually was in accounting myself, and then transitioned to this world 18 years ago. Originally from the Northeast, but lived in Austin for over 21 years. So know this market pretty well.
I love that. I love that. So why don't we dive into the question that seems to be on the tip of everybody's tongues? It's almost like we have a surplus of jobs and not enough applicants, or I hear a lot from my clients, I just can't find good people. What do you think about that?
I think I would agree. I mean, usually when my firm is as busy as we are right now, it's a direct reflection of what's going on in your economy, right? And I think it's a couple of reasons. I think it's where we are. I think being in Central Texas, if I'm comparing it to our other offices across the US, my office by far is one of the busiest. We have more companies coming here than leaving here. I also think it's time of the year. So you have to remember that anybody who was passively thinking about a new job was either holding out for their annual bonus, which typically pays in March, right? They'd already signed an offer letter and just were waiting for that bonus. So you've got this migration, I kind of changing the guard, right? So you've got that, which puts a really tight, everybody's making these shifts, and hiring managers are starting to get into panic mode because they're losing some people, and and everybody's losing them around the same time. And then it's also, I think from a company hiring perspective, companies really feel much more comfortable where they are. They are like, okay, now we have a really good handle. We know what our projections were for Q1, but now we know what the budget to actuals were, right? So we know exactly where we sit. We feel much more comfortable about adding headcount because we're either exactly where we thought we were going to be or we're ahead of the curve. And then I kind of call it like the fear of the summer, right? Like no one wants to hire in the summer because if you're trying to, it's like herding cats with the hiring managers, right? It's like the hiring process will continue, but for most hiring managers, especially C-level execs, if they're going to take any time off, it's typically at that time of the year. And then this has nothing to do with real economy. This is like cyclical that happens every year. So it's a little bit slower. And then you'll see that peak back up like post summer. So right between, I would say, August to right getting into November. And then you'll see it's trending back down the other way just because people are like, listen, I don't want to hire that close to the holidays. I have too many other too many things that are demanding my attention. And then in my world, accounting and finance, a lot of accounting and finance professionals just don't feel right about giving notice on like December 15th, right? Like a lot of them, even though they're still looking, they're going to kind of table their search until next year. So back to your original question. Yes, right now specifically, I would say that we call it the war for talent. It's pretty tight because you're not the only one, in the passive candidates. We tell our clients all the time, they're going to have 2 to 3 other job offers. So help me tell your story. Help me tell tell the story of why it's better to work at the Biz Doctor than anywhere else, right? So, yeah. So, and I think it's not just one factor. I think part of it is where we are. We're in Texas, but I also think it's time of the year, which I think that's just kind of across all markets, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Something else that I've heard from my clients is just this struggle about like, how do I compensate someone? Like, is it a salary? Is it salary and bonuses? Is it the whole comp package? I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing in terms of compensation and benefits and how that's maybe changing over the past few years.
Yeah, I think in Austin, you always have to remember compensation is just tied to revenues at the end of the day, right? I mean, I remember I had a CFO tell me one day, he's like, I am so worth $1 million, but my company is only a $3 million company. So So I'm never going to be paid $1 million, right?
Right.
And so I think people remembering that, and I think people also remembering that Austin's core companies sit somewhere between 40 to 500 million, right? So taking that into consideration, but I also look at like when you're looking at total over a package, it's kind of like squeezing a balloon, right? Like I think sometimes people get so focused on the base, right? But I have people all the time that I place where their base might be higher, but I place somebody at a lower base where their base and equity and bonus far exceeds the person I place at a higher base. So I think being open to that conversation, and I'm not saying that you don't need a base that's competitive for your skill set. I'm saying don't be opposed to listening about the other components like long-term, LTI and bonuses, and understanding what that bonus is tied to. You'd be surprised. It's one of the things we drill down on, but surprised how often when I ask candidates that have a bonus, they're like, I know I get one, but I'm not really sure if it's tied to like EBITDA or my
Mm.
performance, because especially in my world, when you sit in a non-revenue generating seat, really understanding what that bonus is tied to, because you don't affect the revenue. Like you're not in sales, you're not in marketing. So you really want as much as that bonus tied to your personal performance as possible, because you don't control the other aspects, right? So
Mhm.
I think here in Austin, just recognizing that if you're at Dell and you're trying to look at your compensation package and you want to go to a pre-revenue $10 million startup, well, it's not going to be apples to apples, like,
Mhm.
and I think it's also where you are in your career. If you're earlier in your career, you got to pay the bills, right? So your base, and then just like the actual comp and cash at hand obviously is much more important. But like I was just talking to a CFO this morning, when you get to the CFO level, C level, more of a senior corporate controller, director, VP of finance, they want a base that's competitive, but if they're in the P or VC world, they're more concerned about that equity play. That is way more important to them than really anything else. Now they're in a place financially where they can do that. I think the motivator for them is different, but then we
Mhm.
also talk about equity and meaningful equity, right? Like meaningful equity means we know there's a tangible event, whether that's an IPO, whether that's, a change in hands between another private equity firm, whether that's a sale. And often, I mean, there's companies here in town that have been telling me they're like pre-IPO for like 10 years, right? So, uh, so we call that phantom equity when you get it.
Phantom equity. Yep. Yep.
It's like, yeah, they're going to give you equity, but let's not really factor that into the equation of your compensation package, because like that's probably never going to happen, right? So when we talk about that, like meaningful equity is like one of the companies we're working for right now that's going to do an IPO in 2025, and their strike price is like $500 a share. That is meaningful equity, right?
Mhm.
So I think taking all of those and factoring those in, and not being so enamored by just that base. You've got to look at some other ways, but really understanding those other components too. I think sometimes people are afraid to ask. It's not how you ask, it's when you ask, right? Like you're
Mhm.
not, before on your first interview, yeah, you're not negotiating compensation yet. You have to have, they barely know you. You have to get them to really fall in love or in like with you before you kind of hold the leverage to kind of negotiate that. But I think by the time they get to offer stage, I think sometimes candidates are afraid to advocate for themselves because they don't want to start off on the wrong foot. I think they feel like, I don't want to have the offer rescinded. I never see that happen because someone asked. I don't. I mean, not for the most part, anyways. It's okay. It's okay to ask. It's just how you ask and the time that you ask. And not asking for anything overly egregious. Kind of being flexible. But by the time you get to offer stage, really understanding what that is too. Really, it's okay to ask. Hey, I don't really understand how the bonus is defined. Can you give me an example? How is that paid out historically? The equity, I've never worked in a private equity backed company or VC backed company. Can you help me understand how that looks and how's that paid out and how it's vested? I think, unfortunately, sometimes people feel like that is a sign of lack of knowledge or understanding.
Mhm.
And it's not. And by the time you get to that stage, I think companies would question why you're not asking more about that, really.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because it's so much about like what is setting you up for success in the future, as
Mhm.
well as what's good for the company. Like I have a lot of conversations about step costs with my clients where I'm like, okay, when you bring on a new person, that's not only their salary, that's benefits, that's another seat in your entire tech stack, that's another whatever it is. And so when I'm looking at, like, with my COO hat on and saying, like, okay, how are we managing resources? How are they coming on? What is that going to look like? Do we have the cash flow runway to support this person for at least the next 12 months?
Right.
So I'm curious, when you're bringing someone on, especially in a small business capacity, even though I know you work with bigger companies, but is there any advice you give to your clients about how to not only set up a win-win for the person coming on, but for the business to not put it in, say, a compromising position?
Yeah, we do work with, I mean, we do work with small businesses often. I mean, I work with small non-for-profits. And I think often when you're thinking about, especially in my world, which is more of operational G&A costs, right? The fear is I've seen companies, if you think about, okay, I have a budget of, let's say, $100,000 to spend, right? And I think that sometimes they're too nearsighted about what I need today versus what I need long term, right?
Mhm.
Like, in my world, I've seen companies. So there's a CPG incubator. Ooh, oh my gosh. Oops. Sorry about that. There's a CPG incubator here in town called SKU, which
Uh-huh.
I've been on the panel for before, right? And it's very founder led, early stage companies that are like, okay, I've budgeted for X number of dollars for my accounting and finance. I don't need a full time person, but I have $50,000. Like, how do I spend that? And I think often they think about, well, I'm just going to go and get like a senior accountant or staff accountant to do the day to day. You're going to get so much more out of, at that stage, hiring a fractional person like yourself, and still getting a fractional person. You're going to get so much more value out of them in a smaller amount of hours, and they're going to help you dictate that future. I've seen, unfortunately, early stage or startup or smaller companies just start to staff up for the immediate need. Oh my gosh, we have like payroll and AP and AR. Here's the difference. You can bring in an AP person. Now you all of a sudden have all these things that are higher level. You can't ask that person to step up. You can ask a very seasoned controller to step down into the weeds. And you're going to get much more benefit out of that person, because then you're in a place where, okay, I hired an AP person, I hired an AR person, God, I've outgrown them. Now I need a controller. Now all of a sudden you went from, I only wanted maybe two people I'm a small company. I maybe wanted two people. Now I have 5 or 6. I don't need 5 or 6, but I don't want to I just hired this person. I pulled them from another job. So especially in a smaller company, I think the fractional route is, often the perspective is great too, because it's very objective and really can help you dictate what you need for the long term, versus you getting into a place where you make this, what I would say, more junior hire, you outgrow them too quickly. And now you're in a place of like, okay, I don't know what I need. I've had someone more junior. So is it that the work is like, is it, it's really hard to tell, but if you get someone seasoned, they're going to help you walk through that. And it's much better spent, even in a fractional manner. You're going to get way more out of that than you're going to get out of, because then all of a sudden you're overstaffed really quickly, and you don't even know how you got there, because you're
Yeah.
looking at, oh my God, payroll's on my desk today. AP's falling behind. My customers are calling me. Our billing's not going out. Breathe a little bit, right? Hire more, go with a controller first, go with someone more senior, and then rely on them to say, okay, I can do all things, but right now we have really high volume on the AP side. I really want to make sure that, like, we probably need someone on the AP. I can handle everything else, but that's probably where we need that. And that person's going to be able, like, almost like an advisor for you. But unfortunately, if you go to for the short term about what your immediate fire drill is today, all of a sudden, like I said, all of a sudden, as a small company that's, $1 million, $2 million companies, all of a sudden you've got like a 6-person accounting team and you don't even know how you got there. Right. So, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm not trying to pump up you, but yeah, you're a great example. I mean,
I love this.
you know
I
what I'm
love
saying?
this. Well, I think you bring up a really valid point, because I mean, I had this conversation with a client literally 2 days ago where I said, the first part of every hiring process I go through with a client is the clarity on who you actually need. Is this one role? Is this 2 roles? What is their success actually going to be measured on? What problem are they solving? My favorite question to ask is, if they did nothing else except this one thing, what would make this hire worth it? And like, from that conversation, I think it's so important to come back to proactively hiring instead of, to your point, reactively hiring, where you're like, I have all these problems, but instead thinking, okay, who's going to actually get us to where we need to go and be able to stay and grow with the company? Because I think that that's also an important thing that I'm sure you see, where people that maybe you placed now like can grow with the business for a few years, but then eventually their skill set is going to tap out and they'll need someone else, like maybe a CFO instead of a controller. And so my question for you is, when you look at the landscape of like bringing in those experts, because I'm a huge proponent, and I'm sure you've heard me say player versus worker bee.
Yeah.
Like, if you're lean, Like you need that expert to come in and be the player and kind of tell you what to do. And so they're not bringing things back to your plate. That's a rule. That's a rule in my company. If I delegate something 100% to you, I don't want really any part to come back onto my plate because I know it won't get done. So for you, how do you talk to either business owners or candidates and help them see that although that expert might be a little more expensive right now, the long-term payout of that is more beneficial than, say, paying somebody who's a little less senior that maybe you have to train up or spend more time with to get them to that place?
So from my perspective, first of all, I say take that number and spread it out over 12 months and put it into a more of a monthly snapshot. It's maybe not as much as you think it is, right? Because all you're seeing is that glaring, like whatever base salary that is in benefits. And you're just like, whoa. And then you really kind of annualize it and you're like, okay, all right, I'm not freaking out quite as much, right? So I think that's part of it. I think also a really great person is going to pay for themselves in a very short period of time. Like that person, you're going to see the value in that. I mean, it's kind of like the difference between getting from point A to point B in a straight line or going the roundabout way, right? You can probably hire someone more junior and still get to the end result that you want, but how long do you want to take to get there, right? And so someone more senior is going to really help you evaluate. And I think someone more senior too, I mean, I've had CFOs that have worked themselves out of jobs. I think a really good person is going to treat the business as if it was their own and be objective and say, listen, you brought me in as a CFO. Now maybe things didn't play out like we thought they were, or maybe our growth isn't where we are. So right now I'm just a glorified controller for you. You don't need me. Let me help you bring in someone that you really need today. So I think that's also that someone more junior would never be able to assess, or someone more junior would be like, I'm just not in a place where I could like give up my job, like, so,
Yeah.
like, or kind of like, kind of fall, be the martyr. Right. But I've had CFOs often who've done that, who've come in and let's say the business owner, without getting it, thinks they maybe need someone like that. And then either the growth doesn't go as planned. And a lot of them, they'll even say, from what I see for our numbers, you can't even really afford me. Like, let me save you some money. Right. So I think bringing in the right person, like you mentioned, a player is also going to be a really good advisor for the business as well, but also annualizing that over a longer period of time, I think, and really understanding that instead of getting the headlights. And often when I have clients that are a little unsure, I tell clients all the time, I'm super patient. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you actually start talking to people. Like a lot of my clients want to look at a resume and make some, and I'm like, listen, let's do this. Let me give you someone who'd be more senior that comes with maybe a heavier sticker price. And then let me go with someone who'd be a little bit more junior, who is the person that you think that maybe you need. And once you actually start talking to those people and interviewing with those people, it's just an interview. It literally only takes 30 to 45 minutes to really figure out, okay, now I actually see the value in that. Or, you know what? Maybe I can live with this person, but now that I have a point of comparison, so this is the person I thought I needed, but now that I've talked to someone more senior, they're really picking up on all the things that are triggers for me. So I think sometimes people want to rush to get someone in the seat. And not that you don't want to, when you find someone great, that you don't want to hire them. I'm just saying, don't be in a rush to hire the wrong person. You don't want to have buyer's remorse in 6 months from now. I tell my clients all the time, especially with a new hire, if we're not really sure, and then you start talking to people and you realize, okay, I told Laurie and StevenDouglas I needed this, but I need to tweak it a little bit because I thought I needed that, but I need this. I always tell them, we're super patient. Let's do that now. Not just for you, but for the candidate too. We're usually pulling someone from a current place of employment. I don't want to pull someone for you to say in 3 to 6 months, we overhired or we underhired, right?
Right.
So I think taking the time, I mean, being efficient and being timely, but also like and that's where fractional comes in as well. Like we have an interim consulting group that is kind of the band-aid on that, where if we have a perm search, let's say they have someone that came in and gave 2 weeks notice. They're kind of in this panic mode, especially if it's like a core, like a controller or a director level. And they're like, oh my gosh, I have 2 weeks. This person did everything. We kind of have this interim resources group that is just, they work for us. They are just like project based. That's all they like to do. They come in, kind of keep everything so nothing falls through the cracks. And that way you can breathe and you're not in a rush. You can really evaluate it without making a knee jerk, like a very quick decision based on more of like, okay, this person is exactly who I want, but I know they can do the job, right? So I think that's part of it as well, because I think sometimes people are just, I need the work is there, it's falling on me, right? I know that's like a really long answer to a short question, but, but
That's
so
okay.
yeah, I think the person, like I said, you can always ask someone to step down. You can't ask someone to step, you can't ask your person, you've got to have that person that's going to be able to really help you scale and kind of as an expert in their lane, whether it's technology, whether it's operations, whether it's HR, whether it's accounting and finance. I think that is always going to be, and you can still spend the same out of pocket, right? It's just going to give you a much visibility as far as the future versus just the immediate, like what you need today.
I think that's a very great point. I want to shift slightly to talk about onboarding because there's a really interesting statistic. I think it's 80% increase in stickability with a good onboarding process. So from your perspective, what have you seen that doesn't work, as well as what have you seen that works really well when onboarding that new person onto the team?
I always tell clients, or your interview and your onboarding process is a reflection of you. And so the more disjointed it is, the more confusing it is, the more all over the place it is, without an employee even having worked there for one day, they already are starting reservations about thinking, God, did I make a wrong choice? Right. So, I mean, what I have seen is companies, especially early stage companies, they're not really sure. And I think it's also setting the expectation for that individual. I think people, when people are being onboarded, if they know from day one, they're walking into what I consider a bit of ambiguity, right? It's a pre-revenue startup. We still don't even have an HR function. Like, I think you just have to set the expectation. Now, for a publicly traded company where you would expect the onboarding process to be, our onboarding process as an example using ours as an example. I mean, we've got, gosh, I don't know, 250 people now in 26 different markets. It's pretty intense for the first 2 weeks. But people love it here because we do like meetings. It's a lot of meetings. But you get to know everyone across the business. You get to know people in different verticals. You get to get different perspective so that when we have our annual holiday party, which is a 4-day cruise, Steven spoils us. Props to Mr. Steven Sadaka because he takes care of us like no one's business. And he takes the entire firm on a 4-day cruise for our annual holiday party, including everyone in the back office, because he's a really big believer in it's not just the salespeople that make this work, right? Mm-hmm. But it's nice because when you walk onto that ship, everybody in some way, shape, or form, even though we've grown 30%. So I think that, and then it's not just a combination of getting to know people, it's also walking people through our systems, so spending time with our systems. Ours is a little bit more like self-serve drive-through as far as like we look for people with that entrepreneurial kind of mentality. So we show you where everything is on our network so that you know where to go, whether it's for forms, documentation, but anybody here will always ask any questions for you, whether it's HR. So I think having not just the systems, but also the people, it's got to be a blend. Like a really good onboarding process kind of gives you a blend and isn't quite as harsh. And I think that's where people get really, the remote onboarding, I think you've got to really spend, like we're remote onboarding a lot of people. You've got to spend some real time thinking about making people feel like they understand what's the expectation is. Everything from scheduling to benefits, like all those kind of things. Because onboarding in the office, I feel is a little bit more, it's softer. It's a little bit easier. It's a little bit, hey, like me, meet Lauren, she just started, those kind of things. But again, I feel like onboarding is just like your interview process. It is a reflection of you. And I've had candidates pull themselves from interviews where they're like, Laurie, this interview process, I know it's not you, but it's literally dragged out so long. It's been multiple interviews. Like, I feel like at this point in time, like, it's just not giving me a really good feeling about if this is how the company operates overall, I'm probably not going to be the best fit. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think onboarding can be comparable to that for sure as well.
Yeah, I agree. I like to recommend to my clients, I stole this from my time in the medical field, the see one, do one, teach one, to like really help people get acclimated. And I think another part of that is like the comprehension of, you could have a great onboarding thing, but if it's too overwhelming or ambiguous or something like that, then they're just not going to comprehend it. It's going to take longer for them to be successful. But one of my favorite quotes, which you kind of hinted at, is unshared expectations are nothing more than premeditated resentments.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of my favorite ones of yours.
Right? I know. It's so good.
It's so good.
It's so good. It's like, honestly, I use it probably every day in some capacity. But I think it's really like important to think about from an onboarding perspective, because I think that some business owners fall into two camps. they're like, I'm just going to throw you in the deep end and see if you can swim. And if you can swim, you can stay. If you don't, then we're going to get rid of you. Versus, which I don't think is a very good way to get somebody in your company, versus like thinking about what are those foundational structures that you need to understand that will be supportive for your role, understanding how we communicate, our core values, how we're measuring success, and like actually getting somebody not only like, if I'm going to go with my pool analogy, like starting at the stairs and getting a little deeper, maybe putting on some flotation devices. I don't even know if they have those anymore. Do you remember those? When
The floaties, I'm not sure. They're
I just
probably not
remember,
safe anymore. Who knows?
I just remember how much they hurt coming
They
off.
did.
Like,
They
oh,
did.
they like ripped off your skin. Anyway, like I think that when you're thinking about onboarding someone, and I actually had this conversation with a client 2 days ago. I said, the thing that you have to remember is you have this curse of knowledge. You have all this institutional knowledge about how this company runs, how the roles are supposed to run, that you forget that somebody, coming in that's brand new doesn't have this context. So you got to be a little more patient and know that, the activation energy of getting them up to speed is going to take more time and resources in the front end. But if you do it right, it'll pay off in the back end.
I think the mentoring and mentee approach is works really well too. We have that here. So when you onboard, you actually are assigned like a mentor, and then you actually usually mentor for someone else. And I do think shadowing, especially in this business, because we're all coming from different. Like I came from a really small boutique firm, right, where I was kind of like, there were maybe 12 to 13 of us at best, right? And so now I'm walking into a bigger, and everybody here, in this business, everybody here does things. There's no right or wrong way. Everybody kind of brings their own kind of flavor. And I think the nice thing is when you actually shadow someone, you get to understand how they get to see how they do things. I mean, it's why I came here, was to actually like just enhance and learn more about my business and my craft. But it still doesn't basically pull from, it doesn't remove the authenticity that I can still be here, which is kind of why I chose this firm, right? Is I can still be the best version of myself and bring everything I have while still being open to learning from other people, but still not feel like I'm like not being able to be, like I said, the best version of myself. And I think that that's what really how you want to make people feel, is because you want people to feel like we're so excited to have you here, let's see how this is how we run our business, this is how I do it, but I'd love to hear more about like versus dictative, right, where you're like, this is what we need to do, this is how we do it. And that's what's nice about here, is everybody here does it a little bit different, all productive, just in a different way. It's kind of one of the reasons, like I said, I came here, is they really embrace everything about you that you bring, but it also, there's no, just because you don't know something or you want to learn something, it's not seen as a sign of weakness here. It's like, great, that's why you came here. You came here to step up your game. So let's talk about it, right? And I think part of having that mentor mentee kind of like from day one, it really does give you a vibe on the culture. It's more personal, right? Especially, I have a lot of candidates, a lot of times, often why they're looking is they're onboarded with a very big company that like ships them their laptop. Like, here's your laptop, and let us know if you have questions, right? And the big publicly traded companies do often do that, especially remote, right? And I think it's why I see nowadays, like especially candidates who are earlier in their career, regardless if the compensation is higher, they will opt for the lower paying position that's hybrid, because they just feel like from a learning perspective, they're just missing out. Like, because a lot of times, if you think about it, I know when I was in public accounting, or when I was a controller, or even in recruiting in the early days, I learned a lot just from absorbing and listening to the people around me. That's nothing that you're ever going to get off of a Skype or a Zoom or a Teams call, but yeah, so I think so I've seen that, as far as the remote, and they tell me that's, they've like, every time I have a question, I have to like schedule a Teams call with somebody, right? So, and I think if you're in the moment, if you have an issue, you want to have that person next to you say like right now, not, hey, like, can I get on your calendar for a question that I had, from 8 a.m. Right. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah. But I think, like I said, again, I think it's the making everybody feel like more of that personal touch, I think is really, really important.
Yeah. So real quick, in terms of, well, I have another question to wrap us up after this, but in terms of StevenDouglas, I want you to like give a little bit of context of like who you work with, what kind of results And like, so people who are watching, if they're like, oh, this actually sounds like what I need, they know to reach out to you. So how to get in touch, what you do, like just give a little snippet.
Sure. So StevenDouglas, so what I do here in Texas is we do accounting and finance search. So we are an executive search firm. I'd say we do everything. The most junior level position I do is probably a senior accountant, all the way up through CFO. So we're not industry specific, we're function specific. So I work with everybody from not-for-profits up through large publicly traded companies. Like I said, we have a presence here in Austin, Dallas. Austin covers San Antonio, and then Houston as well. But we have I believe there's 6 of us managing directors across the US. So the nice thing is that we partner on a lot of things as well. Like we have a whole sheet of remote jobs. So we get things that are remote, which I'll talk about in a minute. The dynamic of those jobs has changed for sure. So we get remote things, but we get things in our own markets as well. And again, everybody here comes from, the reason I came here is everybody is experienced. When you talk to someone at StevenDouglas, they've been there, done that before. So I think they're not just a recruiter for you. They are a really true partner and your advocate on the candidate side. And then on the candidate side, the way that works in this business is we are free resources for candidates. The fee is between us and the client. So companies call us and say, help us find something that we can't find on our own. And we're based out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. That's our biggest presence. We're an Inc. 5000 company. We are listed in the top 25 executive search firms. Like I mentioned, the Steve and StevenDouglas. Steve is his first name, Douglas is middle name. He was a PwC guy. He's amazing. He's just, I think one of the reasons I came here was culture fit. There's no world, like I would say, rules in the world of recruiting. So as far as being ethical and professional, we just hold ourselves to a higher standard. We know that we have the ability to positively affect someone's life, but there's a flip side to that. And as I tell all of my candidates, just as much as you would do your due diligence on a company you're going to, do the same when you're working with someone like me. It's okay to ask for references. Mine are sitting right on LinkedIn. I've got a million. If that, again, you're entrusting your resume, all these things that are really like very confidential to this person, you have to feel like good that they're going to be your advocate and they understand your skill set, and that you have to realize I'm not looking to place you just to place you. And I think on the flip side of that, from a client perspective, we do a lot of due diligence on our clients. I do walk away from business. If there's inexplicable turnover, if you can't tell me why you've had 3 CFOs in a year, there might be all valid reasons for that. But from where I sit and the trust that I build with my candidates, I can't really help you. And 18 years of doing this in Austin, I usually know there's probably more to that story. So, yeah. So I'm usually more than happy to walk away from that. So I think in this world, I wish there was some type of code of ethics. So you do really have to do your homework about who you're working with. Just simple things like sending your resume out without asking you first. You would think that that's common sense, but it is not. And in a smaller market, the last thing you want is a recruiter. You're confidential looking for a job. A recruiter sending your resume around Austin without your knowledge. You have no idea how small this market is, especially in accounting and finance recruiting. We have other verticals. We have a technology search team. We have we have a presence here in Texas for that. We also have a legal search team that has a presence here as well. We have a HR search team as well, HR search. And sales and marketing, supply chain, and then we have an interim resources team, which is kind of project-based work as well. I think the point in time where we like companies to come to us is if you really are trying to fill it on your own, go down that route first, right? Like go ahead, do the posting. I know what I get from posting, so just saying, volume doesn't equal quality. And then get to that stage where you're like, okay, I've exasperated my internal recruiting team. I've given them a fair shot. We're just not getting the type of talent that I want. That's the time that you come to us, because we aren't just, my postings in Austin are for marketing and advertising reasons only. So, it's really so that people know that we have a presence in what we're working on, but we're really like proactively what we call target recruiting people, looking for those passive candidates that are willing to listen and willing to make a move for the right career opportunity, not someone who's necessarily looking for a job. And then we have 2 different ways you can hire from us. Contingency, which basically means you don't pay me a fee unless I find somebody. And then committed search or retained search, which means basically it's a longer guarantee period. You pay a smaller deposit down. Those are typically reserved for what I would consider director level positions and up. And then, like I said, but we work across, like I said, all verticals, all different levels of companies. And I think the difference, if you look at other recruiting firms, what's our differentiator is we don't take people and put them into markets we want to go to. We hire people that already know the markets. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, like local intel, but like national presence and national scope. If I know I have to go outside of Austin, there's certain skill sets like SEC reporting that I don't have a depth of because we don't have a ton of publicly traded companies here. So when I get
Mhm.
that position, I automatically have this luxury of going out to like all other offices and saying, who's up for, who's up for road trip to Austin? Like who's up for Austin? So that's really kind of the value add is local intel, but definitely a bigger platform of resources for our clients as well.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. Um, is there a best way for someone to get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah,
LinkedIn?
yeah, LinkedIn and my email and my phone number is right there in the heading. I make it super easy. Like,
Okay, perfect.
I make it super easy. It's right there in the heading. So, and I think also, even if companies, I look at myself as an advisor as well, even if companies aren't ready to use us or don't know what it's like to work with a recruiting firm, like I'm not high pressure. Like if you want to know, like, hey, Lori, I'm not ready to use you yet, but I kind of would like to know, we're looking for a senior accountant. Where should I be falling on salary to be competitive? The salary guides in this market, they haven't really ever been great, but the last 2 years, they've really not been able to keep up with the changes. So that's always a free resource for anybody, whether you're a client or not, whether you're willing to use us or not. I'd be more than happy to. That takes me like, tell me your industry, tell me your size, and tell me the structure of your team, and I can give you, or the skill set you're looking for, and I can give you a really good understanding of where you should be sitting to be competitive, or tell you if you're low. And I'm more than happy to always do that for anybody.
Amazing. Okay. Last question. This is a surprise question I didn't prep you for. Uh, I love reading books. I'm a bookworm. So is there one book that you would recommend to a business owner that they simply must read?
Oh gosh, you would ask me that. Gosh, what is the one? I still go back to the one that I read. I mean, I haven't read in a while, to be honest. The one that I read with Mark McLean. What is the name of his book? I don't know it because I just know it by his book. So I always recommend that one just because I think it's something you can tie yourself to. He's the CEO of SailPoint here in Austin, and it's about culture. And I'm trying to think of the name of the book. Oh God, he would kill
I'm
me.
Googling it now.
It's so good. It's so good. I think when you're talking
Joy
about,
and success at work.
I don't think that's. I don't think it's about, it's his culture book. I guess that's bad that I don't know the name.
Building, I don't know. It says joy and success at work, building organizations that don't suck.
Yes, that's it.
I'll
and,
put that link in the like
and I think
little.
why is I know that is so true and authentic, and what he does works, because I would say out of all the companies that I've worked with in Austin in 18 years, SailPoint by far has always had one of the best cultures. You can
Mm,
feel it when you walk in. And I think his best analogy at the ACG conference that we were at last year for the awards was, often leaders have their face to their team and are facing their clients when they should really be the other way. It's almost like a conductor in an orchestra, right? You should be facing the orchestra, not facing the other way, right? And I think
mhm.
it's a really good analogy. I mean, that's just one that he uses in there. But I will tell you, as an example, when I walked into SailPoint, their CFO at the time, Cam McMartin, had just won the Best CFO Award of the Year. I walked in there for a client visit, and his entire accounting team had on T-shirts that say, "We work for the best CFO," and they did that on their own, right?
Oh,
And
see,
I
that's
think that
good.
is just, that like gives me, like, you walk, and I said, "Well, what if he didn't win?" They're like, "Let's not talk about that." you know, So, but I think it was something they did just on their own because they felt that great about working for him. And I'd say that Mark has done a really good job. And even through the changes there, Mark took them through, Tama Bravo backs them. Tama Bravo took them through the IPO and then took them private as well. So obviously there's changes there that they've gone through from an internal perspective, but the culture has always stayed the same. I think if you asked anybody about SailPoint culture and environment, I mean, other companies here have done really well as well, but that one always sticks in my mind. And I think that book is a really good guide for that, because what he does works. It's always worked. So, and I think it's nice to read a book of someone that, for me, I know him, so it's kind of interesting, and it's someone that's here. I think it's something to speak to. But yeah, I need to get on my reading game a little bit more. When I go on vacation next week, I'll get back on my reading game.
I love it. I love it. I'm putting this in the chat right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is all the time we have. This has been so great. Thank you for coming on, especially on your birthday. Happy birthday.
Yeah. It's like birthday in the middle of the week is like, yeah,
I know.
no.
Kind of weird. But anyway, thank you so much for coming on Office Hours. Y'all watching, if you want to reach out to Lori, I highly recommend it, even if, like she said, you're not quite sure if you're in that search mode right now. Any last comments you want to share before we hop off?
No, I think that's about it. I think it's an interesting time to be in Austin. I mean, you were at the event with me the other night through Cantor
Mhm.
Fitzgerald. It was amazing just how like buzzy it was, right? Like I mean, and that's a group of, and thank you. I thanked you this morning on LinkedIn. It was like, 4 women and yeah.
I know.
It was fine. We were
Was not
running the room. It's great.
it was great. It was great. Yep.
It
It was
was the
very
4 right woman to be there, let's just say.
it
Because
was.
we were
It
like,
was.
no problem.
No
So,
problem at all.
but I think just seeing that, I think they're, Austin, most companies here are in that PVC back space, or a good portion of them. And there's a lot of activity there, which I think is what makes Austin such a very economically kind of viable kind of opportunity. There's a lot of free flowing capital, regardless of all the gloom and doom that you hear. I would say specifically here, I think, I mean, you saw it firsthand the other night, right? So
Mhm.
really interesting. No, this has been great. Thank you for having me
Of
on. It was an
course.
honor. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks
Okay.
for hopping on, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it.
Bye.